Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Dr. Lucy. I'm a clinical psychologist based in Melbourne, Australia. And this YouTube channel is an exploration of the overlap between the teachings of Islam, particularly the gems from the Quran, and modern day psychology. And in this video, I want to talk a bit about the story that we carry about ourselves. And what I mean by this is that we all carry a story or a set of beliefs about who we are, what our value is, what our capabilities are, and how the world is. And usually these beliefs are formed from childhood, and we tend to carry them below our conscious awareness, meaning that we're not aware of them because they've been with us for so long. So we just take it as truth. So for example, if a person has grown up in an environment where they had a lot of love and they had a lot of support and they had a lot of positive experiences, then that person may grow up to hold the belief that people are generally trustworthy and that they're lovable and that they're capable and that they're worthy of good things happening to them. And they may carry that throughout their life, and it operates as something that they just believe to be true. For a lot of people though, the beliefs and stories that they carry can have a lot of negative aspects. So for example, for someone who had very abusive parents, for example, or parents that were highly critical, so constantly putting them down, maybe telling them that they were stupid or telling them what they did wasn't good enough, or if they were encountered bullying or they had a lot of struggles in their life, they may grow up believing that they're not worthy, that they're not good enough, that they're not smart enough. And that may be the set of beliefs that they carry into adulthood. Now, the problem with these beliefs or this story that we carry is that not only does it tend to operate below our conscious awareness, meaning that we're not aware of it, that it just is there and we tend to hold these beliefs, but also that it tends to be reinforcing. And what I mean by that is that we tend to interpret experiences or situations through this set of beliefs. So if we have a story that we're not worthy or we're not lovable, when we encounter problems in our relationships or we have conflict with people, we may then say to ourselves, well, this is because I'm not lovable. This is because nobody likes me. This is because nobody wants to be around me or wants to be close to me. And then what can happen is a person can then continue to have these experiences or react in a way that reinforces these beliefs. So they may withdraw from people, or they may tend to stay in toxic relationships because underneath they carry a belief that they're not worthy of this. And when I see people in my clinic, a lot of people come at a point where they might be going through a crisis, but often people get really sick of feeling stuck, that they're really tired of feeling that like they're stuck in a situation which just seems to keep going. And oftentimes I'm really mindful when I hear a person talking of the things that they say about themselves or about the world. And often I'll pick up on when they say things that are really quite negative. So they might say things like, well, I know that I'm not good at relationships, or I know that I'm a failure. And I'll often stop them at that point and I'll say, did you notice that really harsh judgment about yourself? Did you notice that there's a lot of harsh criticism? And I do this to bring it into their awareness so that they can be conscious of the things that they're saying to themselves, and so that we can start to do a bit of a deeper dive into where these things have come from and how they've originated. And this is one of the beautiful things about therapy, is that we can then start to uncover how their early childhood and life experiences have shaped the way that they see themselves. And we can start to challenge and change that. And this takes obviously a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of vulnerability. And this is why doing work on oneself isn't easy. It's a process, and it's a process of exploration and being willing to be vulnerable. But there are so many benefits when a person is able to go through that process of excavating the deeper emotional wounds and how they've shaped them, because we can then go through a process to challenge the things that have embedded in them as personal truths, and we can start to change them so that they can be free of them and start to move forward. Now, a very common thing when I stop someone and say, do you notice that there's that very critical message that you're saying to yourself, like I'm stupid, or I'm unlovable, or I'm never going to be successful? And I'll often stop them and I'll say, did you notice that you said that? And a common response that people will say to me, but it's true. But that's the truth. And to them, that's their reality. To them, it feels like it's a truth. And this is when we can start to unpack it, because my first response is not to challenge it and say, oh no, you're amazing, you're successful, because the person's just not going to believe that. But I'll say, okay, well, tell me why that's true. And they'll often say, well, for example, if they say, I'm a failure, and I'll say, well, why do you believe that to be true? And they'll say, well, I've had failures all throughout my life, in all these different situations, in relationships, in job, in study. I've had all of this ongoing failure in my life. And this is the interesting thing when we carry a set of beliefs, is that we tend to focus on the things that reinforce it, not consciously, we do it unconsciously. And so then for a person who's experiencing that, it just reinforces the idea, well, yeah, it's true, like I'm a failure, or I'm unlovable, or whatever it is, a story that they carry about themselves. Now, we have this really interesting process in the brain. So there's a reason why we tend to see these beliefs are true, or we see evidence that seems to confirm it, because we have particular structures in our brain that will focus in on information that confirms a belief to be true. And this structure in the brain, it's a set of neurons called the reticular activating system. And basically what this set of neurons does is it focuses in on information and it filters out everything else. So if a person is saying, I'm a failure, the brain believes that it's going to select situations where they feel like they failed, or even situations where they may not have failed, but the brain will interpret it as a failure. So then for that person, it just feels like everything that they're experiencing confirms their belief. And so they can go through life if they never challenge it. And that's the reality that they live by, which for people who never get a chance to challenge these beliefs, that can be really devastating, because then they can live their entire life by this set of beliefs. And that can be a sort of prison in a sense that limits them. So for example, they may believe people can't be trusted, or everyone just wants to use you, or I'll never achieve success. And then the brain will then focus in on situations where it believes to be true. And then they may then, again, not try, or not extend themselves, or withdraw from people, or whatever it is in response to that evidence that they feel is true. Now, this reticular activating system can be really useful when we need it. So for example, if we're in a busy, crowded place and we're looking for someone, and when we're scanning a crowd of people trying to find a particular person, our brain will filter out all the other information that's not useful in that particular situation, so that we can focus in on the person or the thing that we're actually looking for. So in certain situations, this structure of the brain is incredibly useful to us. But in circumstances where we carry negative beliefs about ourselves and the world, it can just seem to keep reinforcing it, and it filtering out all the other information or experiences that might challenge that particular belief. So one of the things that I often do when I see that a client has a really unhelpful or negative beliefs about themselves, or a negative story, is we start to slowly challenge it. So Katie Bryan is a psychotherapist who came up with these 4 questions, which is I use sometimes in my practice, which is really helpful to start to challenge a person on their beliefs. So when a person says something to me that they take as a truth, so it might be, for example, I'm unlovable. And the first question is it true? And is that true that you are unlovable? And then most people will say, well, yeah, it's true. And then the next question is it absolutely true? And I'll say to them, absolutely means it's yet absolutely black or white, yes or no. There's no in between. Is it absolutely true that you are unlovable? And then they might say, well, maybe, or maybe not. I said, well, maybe is not absolute. So we can't say it's absolutely true. So then no, it's not absolutely true. And the next question is, how does it impact you when you take on that belief? And the answer would typically be, well, it makes me feel terrible. It makes me feel like no one's ever going to really like me for me, that I'm never going to be in fulfilling relationships. I'm never going to be worthy of being around, and it makes me feel like I just have to stay in toxic or, unfulfilling relationships because I don't feel like I'm going to get anything better. And then last question is, who would you be without this belief? So if you were to drop this belief of I'm unworthy of love or I'm unlovable, who would you be? What would that be like? And then we can start to explore how might that feel to not have that belief, to go out in the world and interact with people and engage in experiences and go about your day and your life feeling, you know what, I'm lovable, I'm worthy of love. And then the final step to this is I say to them, you know what, we're going to flip this around. We're going to get you to take on the exact opposite, that I am completely lovable. I'm totally lovable. And I say to them, I want you to go out and into your day and go back into your life over the coming week or 2 weeks until I see them next. And I say, I want you to take on this belief that I'm completely lovable and see what happens. And this is when, again, that system in our brain starts to notice experiences or situations that start to confirm it. And a person may then start to notice, oh, there are people, who smile at me when I go into work really warmly, or there are people around me who tell me how much they care about me, and that we can start to shift away from this negative belief that a person may carry about themselves. And bit by bit, we can start to change the story. Now, whenever I think about shifting a person's belief, I think about the ayah in Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah will not change your condition until you change yourselves. And I find this to be incredibly powerful, because what this indicates to me is that Allah has given us incredible capability to change ourselves, to change the way we think, to change the way we feel, to change our beliefs about possibility, to start to intentionally connect to a more helpful, optimistic, positive way of being in the world. And then but the other side of Allah will not help a person. So it indicates that when you change yourself, then the help of Allah will come. So then when we take those steps to actively change ourselves, to change the way we think, to change the way we see our story, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will then bring the help to then bring on that, to facilitate that change. But we have to make the effort first. And this is very powerful, because when we think about our story, we can frame our life as being unworthy or being a failure or being unlovable. But when we start to shift it into looking at situations of, okay, I've been through challenges, but I haven't given up. I'm constantly learning. I'm resilient. I'm a survivor. I'm a fighter. I don't let these situations destroy me, and I'm getting stronger and stronger every day. Then we can begin to see these situations as not just evidence that we're broken and that we're hopeless, but that Allah is strengthening us through difficulty. And we can also start to see the good things around us, which is part of gratitude, which is part of appreciation, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that when you're grateful, I'll give you more. So when we shift our view of circumstances, when we start to look at things and look at what we can appreciate, look at the good, look at things not in this negative way, but of what we can take out of it, even when things are hard, rather than thinking, oh, I always fail. We can look at it in terms of, what does this have to teach me? Because I'm someone who learns and I'm someone who wants to grow. And what is this situation come to teach me? We can start to shift in a way which allows us to connect to more gratitude and appreciation, even for the difficult things that we go through in our life. And what I think that it also shows us, this ayah in Quran, going back to the ayah in Quran where Allah says that Allah will not change the condition of the people until you change yourself. What it also shows me is that we can choose our own identity, that our past, that the things we've done or the things we've been through, it doesn't have to define who we are. It doesn't have to be something that we're stuck with, that we can choose the person that we want to become. And that choice is incredibly empowering. And I think of the stories of, for example, the Sahaba. And some of the Sahaba, prior to them embracing Islam, some of them had been very harsh people and done some pretty awful things. Like, for example, we know that some of the Sahaba, such as Umar ibn Khattab, that they had even, before Islam, they had even buried their own daughters, because that was a practice among the Arabs before Islam came, that because they favored sons, it was a practice that of burying daughters. It was an accepted thing that people did. And yet, although many of these Sahaba had embraced Islam, the things that they had done beforehand didn't have to define who they were afterwards. It showed that they could leave those things behind and that they could move forward and become righteous, pious servants of God. And when we think about our own selves, how often do we see our negative actions or our past experiences and we define it as our identity, when in fact it doesn't have to? And we've all done things that we regret. We've all done things that we wish we hadn't. But the difference is that we don't have to let those things define us. We don't have to let those things become our identity. That when we recognize that we can choose our stories, that we can choose to leave those things behind and take on the perspective of, I've learned and I've grown and I'm choosing a different path. And so when we see it through this lens, we can see the beauty of the journeys that we've gone through. Just like when we look at the stories of the Quran, and it's filled, the Quran is filled with stories of righteous men and women going through difficulties. And when we look at them, we don't look at, for example, the hardships that Musa went through and think, oh, well, that just shows that he was failing because the children of Israel were constantly disobedient. No, we look at it and through he was tested, because we understand that is the purpose of his mission. That was his story, that he was being tested and he was constantly having to keep on with the mission, even though he was constantly faced with the disobedience of his people. Or we look at the difficulties of Yusuf alayhi salam and all the hardships that he went through. But because we know his story, we know that although he went from his brothers throwing him into a well, and then he went to being sold as a slave, and he was then at one point imprisoned, we don't look at that and think, oh, everything was hopeless for Yusuf. No, because we know that his story was about preparing him for something bigger and better. And so in this same way, it's so important that we do the deep dive for ourselves and we start to actually reflect, what are the stories that I'm carrying about my life that are limiting me, that are holding me back, that are keeping me stuck? And we can start to dissect them and we can start to challenge them, and we can recognize that we all have the choice to choose a new story. And that, as Allah says, that when you start to change your inner self, when you start to change your condition, then Allah will open doors for you along that path that you seek to go on. So I hope that this was helpful. Let me know in the comments your thoughts and reflections. And I want to say that I appreciate every single one of you who's watching my videos, who's subscribing. This is a very new channel, and I'm just so appreciative to everyone who has been commenting and been showing their support. So Thank you so much. I hope that this was helpful. I wish you the love and the peace and the blessings throughout this day and the days to come. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.